Hello and welcome to Co-op for Two. I'm Greg.
And I'm Jesse.
Today we're looking at Flashpoint Fire and Rescue.
There's no and.
Flashpoint Fire Rescue. Doesn't it seem like there should be an and?
You're right.
So off to a rocking start here. So, Jesse, how did you come to this game?
Yeah, well, we played this last at our co-op con.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a game that I bought over a decade ago and played with my family and thought, it's nothing. Got rid of it, sold it. And then we were talking about it recently, and you'll talk about your history of it. But we both decided we want to give it another shot. And I had totally no expectations. I thought it's a ripoff of Pandemic, light clone. We're probably not going to like it. So I went into it blind when we played it. And what was your?
Yeah, well, I think when you first get into gaming, this is definitely the game that was one of the games that was like early on.
Yeah.
When I got into gaming, like again heavily, right?
Like mentioned in the same breath as Pandemic,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Like co-op,
and
similar.
And Pandemic was the game that kind of reintroduced me to gaming, and I was like, wow, this is awesome, And so to me, like, randomness in games is not for me, and like I saw the die rolling, like put a fire in some random spot and stuff, and I just was like, I completely wrote it off.
Yeah.
And then I actually ended up playing it with somebody. Like I went to their house for a gaming day, and they said, "Oh, we're just about to start this one. You want to jump in?" And I said, "Fine." And I was like, and I was really surprised,
Okay.
because I thought, "Oh, this is quite fun," because it wasn't crazy, but it was just one of those things where I felt like it was a short game and it had some interesting choices. And I said, "Oh, and I had brought it up to you, and we got a copy and played it, right?" So that was
but I don't think you had high expectations when we played it either, right? You weren't like, "This is an amazing game. I can't wait to play it again." You were kind of like, "Well, it might be okay." Maybe
I thought it was
memory.
that bucket of like, I'm like, maybe this will be that 45-minute game that's just a fun game for 45 minutes or whatever, right?
Right. So we won't spoil what our reaction was after playing it. Let's just start slowly. What do you think about the art and components here?
Well,
Does it thrill you? Like, were you excited about playing Firemen?
oh, well, that's more theme. So do you want to talk
theme
about
and
the
art.
theme of the? Okay.
Either way.
Well, for the theme of the game, it's interesting because my brother's a firefighter.
Okay.
He's a professional firefighter. He's been for a number of years. Was volunteer for years before that. And as a kid, we would go to like the parades where the fire trucks are all going by and stuff, and we were quite excited about it as kids. But I mean, as an adult, I have no real interest. I mean, I'm happy for the job that they do, and I think it's interesting. Like I think anything's interesting, but ultimately, I'm not. I don't really have an interest in firefighting.
Yeah, I have no specific desire to play a fireman or anything like that.
Sure.
So the theme does not appeal to me in any particular way.
Having said that, like having not an special interest in firefighting or enthusiasm for it, like when we were looking at, like when we bought this at a co-op con, I'm like, oh, I want to play. Oh, that'd be cool. Do I want to be like the person that's saving the people? Do I want to? And like I was really excited about the theme.
Well, we very quickly, completely were immersed in this.
Yeah,
theme.
it was like we started. I mean, and maybe it was like a little bit when we were looking at the game, and then when we started to play it, I was just like in. Like I was like,
well, there's
100%.
something about these boards too. I don't know. It's like a blueprint. You're looking down. There's something like spatially when you look at this, it grabs you. You're like, oh. Is this the right way to get this person? Or what if we get trapped in this room? Or what if this, very quickly, both of us were all in on the theme and our jobs and what we had to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's frankly, it's surprising to me. It's surprising how much, like, I felt like, wow, this is really cool. I really want to, like, go in and put the fire out and drag the people. I don't know if it, like, speaks to something about, like, your childhood or something, Like, it's like, dinosaurs is, like, this inherent thing that, like, all kids, like, really love. Most kids love dinosaurs. And, like, when you think about dinosaurs, like, some piece of you, I think when you see Jurassic Park, you're like, oh, there's our movie reference. It's like, hey, it chaps into some inner piece of you. And I think maybe that's sort of at play.
For sure. Like we both tiptoed in, and then we were fully in.
Fully in.
And I do think there's something about this board that, I mean, it really, you can read everything totally well, and you're like, oh, that's the bedroom. Someone's in there, stuck in there.
It's interesting because I have kind of an opposite reaction for the components in the art. To me, like these are amazingly well done. This is an expansion actually, so but you know, the art on the cards, I think, and the characters and stuff is really very evocative. It looks great. You know, like these are fine, but you know, like to me, like these tokens, it's like barely serviceable to me. It doesn't look, and the art on the board to me is too clean and a little boring, frankly.
Yeah, I would disagree. I mean, like, I love how readable it is. I love that
it's definitely
they traded off functionality for ultra realism, but for me, this is like the perfect trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think like it's definitely legible. It's very readable. You know what's going on, which is important for a game. But I do think that the art could have been more exciting. I mean, like this grass, it's just not that evocative. These dice, you know, pretty standard, not that exciting. I mean, you'd think maybe one of them would be orange and red. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that would be a good idea. I'm just saying something more evocative. Like you could imagine this being an orange die with black writing, very visible still, but yet maybe more. And like these are, what is this? It's a wall.
Yeah.
I mean,
those could be anything. Those could be anything.
I do, however, really like that the other side of this board is another. I'm going to mess you up here, Jesse. Maybe not. Okay. I thought I could lift one flat. I do like the fact that it has a completely other.
Well, we'll talk about like there's a whole chain of expansions for this game, all different maps. They're all.
But just in the base box, you could see that it's pretty cool that they're just two different layouts of a house, meaning like you're not going to get bored with this layout.
And the differences are functional. Like if there's an easy way to get to some places and a hard way to get to others, and you've got some very tough choices about. Where to egress in.
Yeah, I think on our playthrough we played. We should have mentioned that already as well. We do have a playthrough and a quick and dirty rules for this. So if you want to see a rules overview or you want to see us actually play a heroic level of this game, check out those other videos. But when we did,
spoilers.
Yeah, we have on the back side of this. I think the other building had like only like 2 entry points, and that really made a complete difference in the difficulty of that.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty cool. I mean, these, you know, little boring to me. You know, these are fine. These are a little boring. I mean, overall, it seems this is not graphically, like this is like the basic graphic design.
Well, but on the other hand, I mean, it's a style. It's a consistent particular style. It's sort of no nonsense, clean, minimalist style, but it makes the board readable. Frequently in these games, we're like, we can't tell what's where, and this game is very readable. You can look at that board and you can see how to get,
just want to mention the miniatures real fast. The miniatures do look cool. I mean, they're a little cartoony, but I do think that they fit the game itself. I think when they're on the board, they don't look incongruent. But I do think like this artwork is completely different. It's a very clashes completely with really this board, all the components, and those especially. So, and that's the most evocative part. I think this is the art that I would prefer to see.
Although I think if you had that art everywhere, it'd be harder to read the board. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that is definitely a trade-off of function and sorry. So yeah.
Speaking of which, I mean, let's segue into.
Oh, can I mention one more thing about the? I'm sorry, but I just want to point out one thing. You could imagine a 3D board would be incredible.
It would be a pretty cool experience to be playing on a 3D board.
I mean,
the only problem with that is that, you know, there's so many expansions, like you'd have to have a closet for storing the expansions. But yes, especially because you're knocking down walls.
Yeah, I mean, it would just look incredible. Now, I will say that, and this would jump the price up, but if you can imagine like this game going on Kickstarter and saying you're going to get wall tokens that you can use in every map, you're going to have like, you know, stand-up fire that you put in the thing. I mean, you could see like a gorgeous version of this game and from a different, like if Cool Mini or Not or something did that.
And because the theme is so evocative, it would be fun to play with that.
But I will say just on that, like it is nice that it is a very inexpensive game. I think like in terms of how board games are, and it's easy to like rack up a bunch of expansions.
The expansions are quite cheap.
So that's nice.
Yeah.
So
leading from the theme and the art to gameplay, I mean, one of the things that we both loved, I know, was how tightly woven those two were. Like, you instantly feel like the rules make so much sense, right? Like, what are your favorite thematic rules making sense of this game.
Well, I'm going to walk it back just for a second.
Okay.
Jeff Engelstein, who I think is amazing. I love Jeff Engelstein. This is a little plug for him. On one of his podcasts about game design, he was talking about, like, if you have, if you say this piece can only move on blue, this piece can only move on gray or green, and then this piece can move anywhere. You're gonna have to remember that, and it's a lot to remember. You're like, oh, what does this one do again? But if you say that's a ship, that's a plane, that's a helicopter, and that's a tank, you don't have to say anymore.
Right.
And this game exemplifies that in a major way. Yeah, because there's some amazing, really thematic ties where it's like, okay, can you carry? So I mean, if this fire was on the board, can you carry a person through this space that's on fire?
Nope.
No, he's gonna die or she's gonna die. Can you carry the hazmat through? No, you can't carry
it'll explode. The
propane
gasoline,
tank through the right. I mean, how it costs 1 action point to move to another space. It takes 2 if you're carrying a person. Why? Because you're I mean, it's every rule is
everything works
boom.
like that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it explodes. Okay, it's going to damage the wall. You want to egress in. You've got to knock down the wall. It takes 2 shots to do it. All of the design, the iconography is great. You're like, okay, this is a door. You take an action to flip it open. Yeah, of course, it takes you time to open the door to get in.
Yeah, and there's there are a little tiny rules where it's like if the when the walls get burned or exploded, you add 1 and then 2 and then the wall's broken. This one simply gets removed, but it's like you don't have to think about it. You're like, well, of course, if there's an explosion, the door's going to blast off. So that's it. And that's, has those 2 spaces.
And it's almost like there's a sandboxy element of this. Like, here's this building, but you're like, I want to blow a wall in. Go for it. You want to knock down that wall? Go for it. But it's going to take you some time, and you're going to damage the building, which can come down. If the building takes as much damage, it's not just the abstract rule, you die. No, it's that the building collapsed. And you've got a character that could even put things back, and you can put out the smoke, but it's going to spread. The explosions are natural. They spread. If one explodes, another explodes. Another part that I love that's so cool thematic is that there are always 3 of these points of interest on the board, right? And it's like, you don't know. Some of them are real people. Some of them could be a cat. But until you go discover that person, you don't know. So you're wasting time getting to them unless you take the character who's got an ability to scan and see who's there.
So that's what I was going to do. I was going to tell you. I was going to do a little quiz for you here. What is the image specialist do? Imaging technician.
Yeah, if you were guessing, well, the image technician can pick a thing and look at it and see if there's a person there or not.
Yeah. What's the fire captain do?
He can direct people around and give orders.
I mean, it's so easy. Yeah. It's so easy,
right?
And how is the rescue specialist good at putting out fires?
Rescue specialist that's the one that can help bring people quicker. Can spend extra actions, but they're not good at putting out fires.
They're a specialist.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to remember all that stuff, which is really, really very cool. Yeah, yeah. I do want to mention too. We didn't when we were talking about the components. It's amazing how satisfying having a fire truck and ambulance are. That's just so cool because you can get on the fire truck and in your head you're like you're taking the fire truck around the board. You bring your fellow firefighters. You're bringing the people to the ambulance.
And it's half thematic and half fascinating strategic decisions. Should we move this ambulance here? That would be a quicker way to get this person off, but it's going to take time. Should we take the time to bring the truck over here because someone could get on there and use the deck gun?
Who doesn't want to fire the deck gun?
Yeah.
In your head, you're like,
but it's costly unless you take this person who's really especially good at using the deck gun. Yeah, everywhere you go, the thematic decisions are gamey. They're not in there just for theme. They're in there because they're very elegant, clean, mechanical decisions.
May I make a quick transition here? Yeah. So I think that it really makes it so I think it's like a great family weight. That's kind of the weight of the game for me.
As long as you bring in an expert to set up the game, the family can play it.
Yeah. Well, there's a family
variant. That's right, a little simpler,
which is cool because if you were a family, you could play that, and then if you got good at it,
and it's a good game. It's not
you can upgrade it right in the box.
Yeah,
which is amazing. But it just I think also that not only does the theme lend itself, but also the rules make sense. So I think it's very approachable in that way.
And speaking of family variant, can you imagine how much fun the kids would have, like driving the fire truck? Or what about when you discover a cat? You're like, I want to go rescue the dog. Let me get him out.
Yeah, we're like, there's the cat right there.
It would be a good game for fun, and it doesn't feel like it has some real quarterbacking issues. So I think a family would play it, and the kids would love.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, because when we played like one night, we played like 6 games in a row. We were trying heroic, and like we just kept going and going, and like I felt like as the hours waned on, I have to always be very cognizant of like I'm trying to hold back from being a quarterback or trying like that's funny, like never mind. I'm like a complete nerd. I'm like, I'm gonna be the quarterback. I'm never gonna be a quarterback. But like I mean like just controlling, saying I do this. So I do
all
actually think
cooperative games have that problem.
This one definitely has it.
You think so?
I think for sure.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the characters and how, like, we play, one of the things we look for when we play a cooperative game, wouldn't you agree, is like, it's frequent to have asymmetric powers. Sometimes they're like, it's a little bit here, you get a tiny little efficiency here. This game, one of the most exciting parts for me about this game is, you take different characters, you're playing completely differently. You're taking on a completely different role, right? I mean, if you take the deck gun, that's your job. You're not going to go in there and be rescuing people. You got to focus on your job. And it's really fun to try those different strategies.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked before about playing Euro games and stuff, and it's like, I tried the sheep and, barley strategy. Next time I want to do steel and I want to build some buildings. I mean, like, that's what makes a game exciting, is that like...
And exciting to replay it and come back to it.
And then you can discuss, like, you know what, I don't think that's a better strategy, or I should have done this differently, or whatever. And in this game, like, every time you play, like, I love the fire captain, and like, you'll be the deck gun guy sometimes, and like, one time I was like, well, this time I tried, I think one game I was like, I was the rescue specialist and somebody else, and I was like trying to get people out. And then the next game, I used the, you mentioned
like, I'll give a little, while you're thinking, like, look, you can play the dog. Send the dog in as a dog character.
Yeah, one time, like, I decided it would be cool to play the CAF's firefighter and the veteran. And, you're kind of doing two things in the game, right? Your goal is to save people, but you have to put out fire enough so that you can get people out and you can prolong the game, right? And so, like, I just thought, like, you know what? I'm just going to totally work on the fire. Because we do some mixture, and I just took the veteran and the firefighter, and the two went through together. The veteran was kind of like boosting the firefighter with actions, and also making sure explosions wouldn't get him. And then he was just going in and like knocking out the fire, and I was just like a machine. And Jesse would be like, "Do you want it?" I'm like, "No, I'm killing this fire." And I was just moving from room to room, like getting rid of the fire, and it was like really fun. It was like a really fun thing.
Well, I think that's a good point to mention, which is there's two parts of that make it even more interesting. The first thing is that we play games sometimes where the characters are different, but this one, not only are they different, but they really feel like you're taking different roles and working together. Like, as you say, like this captain, like he likes working with someone else and boosting them. And you have to, in this game, you're sharing responsibility. You're like, I can knock down walls and put out fire, but I can't help people. So you're going to have to work with me to do your job. And it really helps divide up the labor and make it fun. Now, this is a rare game. We'll have a whole discussion about playing multiple characters, but this is a rare game where
we have a video coming up about that.
But I actually enjoy playing multiple characters.
Yeah, well, I think it's actually necessary in this game.
I don't agree with that. I still think you could have fun. So before you go, I still think it would be it's a different kind of challenge, but it is fun to be like, what if we only take these two? How are we going to figure out a way to stop? But yes, sorry, go ahead.
So, not to skip ahead, but one of the parts about this game, like, the thing about this game is that, like, it's paced well. There's a natural arc where the flare-ups these flare-ups happen, which make you, every time you hit one, you put out another fire, and then it can chain and chain and chain. And so, like, the gamey part of it is kind of, I was thinking now in one of the expansions, which we have out here, is a structural engineer, and he can remove these flare-ups. But it's hard. I mean, it takes you time to do it, and it takes you time to, you have to have no fire in that space. But if you were able to eliminate all the flare-ups, you could slow the game down and play.
We haven't tried that yet, but we're both curious to try it.
So what I was telling Jesse was that, like, if you took the fire captain and used the structural engineer and you used him to move this character around the board and eliminate the flare-ups, and then you had the other two characters just putting out fire, and then when you got all the flare-ups gone,
You can do the thing.
You switch the two characters into, because no more flare-ups can come out at that point if you've eliminated them all. That's the only thing that brings
you
it out.
probably want to, but yes.
And then you switch the other two characters to like paramedic and rescue specialist, and then the rest of the game you just went in there. And so just the fact that exists, that you can make those decisions.
Yes, well, that's a great example. Let's talk about that a little more. This has this wonderful rule of switching characters. Now, it's not cost-free. It's, again, thematically perfect, right? You have to go. It's costly. You have to go back to the truck. You have to start your turn on the truck. So it's a time sink. But then you can swap out. And it adds this sort of meta decision about when should you switch, what should you switch to, when is it time to switch strategies. And that level of strategic thinking, not tactical, but... And we did that in our last game, right? In our playthrough, we switched characters.
Yeah, so I want to back up for a second about that, because I think that, like, so we always talk, you take a shot, whatever, it's like pandemic discussion. And there's moments, there's like 3 or 4 games of that where I distinctly remember, I mean, I don't remember the exact things, but I remember this happening like 3 or 4 times. There's a card in there that allows you to switch your role.
In Pandemic.
In Pandemic. And it's an event card that you can get.
Is it in base Pandemic, or is it in one of the expansions?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I don't remember either, to be honest with you, but I believe it's in that. But there's games where I've been like, oh my God, if I switch to this character, we can win in this way, right? And this game, it has it just baked into the design.
Base rule.
And so we spend, if you watch our playthrough, we spend like 10 minutes discussing which characters to start with.
Yeah.
And then how our strategy will change through the game. So in one of the versions, you have a lot of hazmat, like in the heroic thing, and these things can explode and do terrible damage.
Yeah.
And so I said and when we had played before, we had lost a number of heroic games just in the first couple of rounds that like it was a hazmat would explode, and then it would chain into another one, and then it would just be done. The game was over before it started. So we always would take the hazmat specialist, because we would want to eliminate the hazmat. But then the guy's or girl, that specialist is no longer really that useful. So then it's time to switch out. And then there's discussions of like, well, if we take the imaging person, he's good, and then a rescue person, but then, well, then we need to get somebody that's going to be fighting the fire. And so there's this interesting discussion of like, what are we going to take now?
There's some initial discussions,
when will we switch?
And there are a couple more, right? It's like, where do you want to start? Each character can start a different place, and you're like, well, where should we put the truck? Because all these things, moving them, changing them, cost stuff. So you're like,
You come with a strategy like, well, maybe we should start here. We go in the door. Maybe we should start here. We can chop through the wall.
Maybe
I'll
we
start
split
over
up
there with you, and then I'll come in with you, or I'll go on this side so I can fight the fire on this side.
Yeah.
There's so much strategy, like in just
planning,
in just the planning of the game and getting ready, and not even to mention, as we said before, that you can start with these different characters and have these cockamamie plans, and it's just fun. I'm like, I just thinking about that. I'm like, oh, I want to do that again, or I'm just like the fire.
It really makes you want to try different strategies, which is interesting because it's also worth pointing out. Maybe you want to call this a flaw, but when it comes to like what specific thing you do, you're not planning that many moves ahead. You're not making wide-arcing strategic plans. But there are these levels of decisions you're making, and you pick different characters, you're going to have a different game, a completely different game.
And then halfway through, you're going to say, look, what's going to help us right now? You say, look, the building, it's blazing. There's just so much fire. Like, what do we have to? You know what? I'm going to go down. I'm going to switch to the deck gun operator, and I'm gonna just keep blasting the.
The other thing that's so satisfying about that decision is that there are lots of decisions in a game we might argue about, like, I think I should go here, and then you can argue logically why not. But some of those decisions about when to switch timing are much more intuitive. They're like, is this feel like the right time to spend a couple turns to switch characters? And it's hard to logically defend that. You're kind of like working on gut. You're like, I feel like now the tide is turning that we should switch to rescue. And we've had some very good discussions, like, should we make a run for it, right? In a lot of these games, we get to that point where, like...
in cooperative games, in general, there's a moment...
Is this the time to rush for the exit? And
this game definitely has it where you're like...
Oh, it's so good in this game.
Where you look and you're like... It's gonna
blow.
And that's what's cool too, is the game ends when the building collapses or too many people die. But the idea that, like, it's sort of like you're in there, you're sweating, you're like, chopping the wall, you're like, you pick somebody up and you're like, we got it, and you look around and you're like, and I'm like, Jesse, this thing's coming down. Grab who you can. We got to get out now. And it's a really cool, like, thematic thing, and it feels exciting.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to the other point I want to mention. so often in the games we play, what I care about most is like those memorable moments and stories and stuff. Now, when you play this game and you turn over that cat and he's got an explosive gas can sitting next to him, you're like, well, I know to win the game, it's more important that we go over here and put up this fire. But I don't want that cat or that dog to get blown up. And you've got this really fascinating tension. And we've got stories. Like, we see rooms where there's like a guy hiding behind two gasoline, and we joke about it. Like, we have fun. Yeah. And the last game we played, like, there were all these women, and we're like, this is like some sorority house. And there was little stories about why they were all bunched up, what they were doing, what they were thinking, right?
Yeah. Well, no, because I think Jesse had carried one of the women, right? And she passed by someone else that was close to, and it's like this woman's like, and then there were 3 in a row.
Greg always tells the story of like when we walk by the people and don't save them.
There's 3 people basically. It doesn't really matter that what sex they are, but he carries one by this person out to the ambulance, and then he goes back in, and of course he's going to grab this one, and this person that there's like, what about me? Yeah. What are you doing? And we always laugh when there's like 2 of this and fire comes out, and then you see someone here, and you're like, yeah, sorry. Better start writing your will. I mean, you just look and you're like, they're like, what? Look, it's like a cartoon where they're looking around at like this stack.
But that's just like all over this game. That's what we're thinking. We're thinking about like the story of going on.
And the end of the game. I mean, like we talked a little bit about the way it ramps up, which is very good because it just.
Yes, we should talk about that. Of the co-op games that we like most has this pacing where it's getting scarier and scarier. And boy, does this game have it with the fire coming out. Like you feel like it's out of control and you can only tamp it down for a certain amount of time.
I mean, like I feel like whenever we've won or come close to winning, like with maybe minor exceptions, it's always been like.
It's been a nail-biter.
Okay, it's been very,
Yeah, for sure.
Want to tell us about this doggy? He's an expansion, by the way.
It's just like, it's in addition to the gamey part of it. There's a good example of how, like, there's a psychological, emotional element to this game that's very satisfying. You're like, look at this, 12 action points. How fun is that to have 12 action points? It's pretty fun. Normal character has 4. It's hard to play well, but you can look at it from the other side and say, well, this is an interesting challenge.
Jesse, can the dog go through fire?
Well, the dog can't go fire. It's a dog, and he also probably can't open.
He can't open doors, and he can't move through fire. And I mean, again, that's like
he actually can carry victims, but it's a lot of effort.
He drags them. Yeah.
He drags them. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like you're like, well, yeah, I want to use this dog. Of course, he's going to be my little companion. We're going to go through and save people with your dog. I mean, that's amazing.
It's not like objectively bad or good. It's like, how do you make it work? Like how will someone team up with him to break down doors?
I was just ribbing Jesse a little bit because he always wants to take the dog, and I'm always like. That's the wrong choice.
It's true. When I see those 12 action points.
Yeah. But he can't go through fire, and usually the building is burned. Jesse and I are real good at saving people. We are less good at putting the fires out.
Now, while we're talking about mechanics that are cool, like trading out the things, here's another thing that adds this little delicious decision. Do you know what I'm going to mention?
This.
That's right. So why don't you explain what that's about?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of times in a game when you're playing like a co-op or something, and you're just like, I don't have any good moves right now. Or like you think like, I have one action that I can take, but I can't use it because I can't go here and it won't help. And this is a great thing where you can decide to save your points. And then you can use them next time. Now, you can never take more. So if this guy has 4 action points, well, you can't ever have more than 4 saved actions. But it's great when you're like, it's like you're kind of like biding your time.
And it's often a very strategic decision. You're like, well, I could do this now, but if I wait and save them, I'll have more freedom next time, but maybe waiting's dangerous. Now, I will say that, like, we use these cubes we talk about a lot. You should get something else to help you keep track because you've got like multiple kinds of actions you can take.
Yeah, so I think one of the expansions has ones that you can flip over to show your actions. But what we did was we each have like so for instance, this character here, has 3 free movement, and then they have 4 regular actions. So we'll have 4 green cubes, and then we'll have 3 silver cubes, say. And then that means like when you spend the silver cube, you just pull it off of a card, and it's very easy to keep track of.
Once you get the hang of it, it makes a lot of sense.
Very easy, because otherwise I feel like without those, it's very easy to just be like kind of like 1 move free, and then you kind of keep doing that math. You know what I mean? Where like you're like, wait, no, I'm going to do something different. Wait, that was my 1. When did I move 1, or was that my 1?
Yeah, you need to be able to keep track.
It's like
use the cubes.
And actually, just as gamers in general, it's great to have like a couple bags of extra cubes into extra colors, and maybe a couple extra pawns in your colors. I mean, there's just a few things that are like really good little additions to your game room that are very easy to get.
Yeah.
And having those cubes, and he's got those heavy-weighted cubes from Board Game Geek.
Yeah, they're nice.
Can't say enough good about it. I think they're great. But yeah, I mean, just looking at the dog, you're like, I mean, and he has a little dog figurine, which we don't have here because it's one of the expansions. We have it, but not out on the table here. But it's like, you look at that and you're like, yeah, like I want to like run around with that little dog, and it just gets you excited to play.
Yeah. Now,
I mean, that's a big deal, you know.
Now I'm gonna lead us to right before we get to our negatives, which there is one big annoyance that we'll talk about in a second. But the good way to lead in there is, you know, I think when I first played this, like this is a game that if you were new to games, you might feel a little overwhelmed, especially when you get to the setup.
Oh,
But that thing about keeping track of things, like that works for us.
Yeah.
This might be a little heavier bandwidth for some people who aren't experiencing games. I have a hard time telling, but
I think if you're watching an hour-long review, which is
that may have been why I didn't get into it when I first played it. But okay, let's talk a little bit about the setup. It's insane.
I mean, it's like roll 2 dice. Okay, and put a fire there, make an explosion.
The first roll, you just roll 1 die and you look up to a lookup table.
No, that's what it is. You look up the table, and then the next one is you like save one of those dice and roll the other one, and then the next thing is like and put a fire there, and then the next one is like if the moon is full, then you will roll the other dice and add 4. I mean, it's just like it's crazy. It's
crazy.
And the thing
feels weird.
You set this game up. I mean, we've set it up like I don't know 15 times or something or 20 times, and the thing is like I couldn't tell you what the order is.
Pandemic, it has to get done in an order.
We just played Dead Men No Tells No Tales. Like, I mean, I could set most of that stuff up, even only having played it a few times. Or if I played something a lot, I feel like you should. Yeah. This game, insane. And in fact, I said to Jesse that maybe what we should do is have like, is just randomly come up with a bunch of setups. Like and write like fire goes here, fire goes
this could really use an app that could generate the setups for you. I mean, it's also weird. It's weird with the explosions happen and stuff like that happen. There are some exceptions in the setup rules that don't follow the normal rules when you encounter things. And the other thing is a pro and con that go hand in hand with that is that this game has some wonderful different variations of difficulty level, which is great because you really can adjust it. But that it affects the setup in a very cumbersome way. Like there are like 5 different places where depending on the difficulty you do different things, and it would be very easy.
And then you roll these dice and you find the location, and you're
sometimes
like, and then it's something's already there, so you got to re-roll it, and it's quite laborsome. I mean, it's funny, but it just, especially when we played Heroic, and as I mentioned before, some of those chain reactions with the explosions with the hazmat, it basically means set it up. Take 10 minutes to set the game up, and then I lost within 10 minutes. Set up again. So that's really agonizing to me, and it reminds me of another game that we played that is this agonizing.
Legends of Andor.
Oh my god, it's maybe the worst.
But yeah, so this could really benefit from an app that just said, "Here's the map. Here's a picture. Set it up this way.
Put a fire here, and then you just go down. What goes in this space? Nothing. This space, point of interest. This place, fire and a flare, whatever." So. This, speaking of dice, so you and I both had decided that, like, before we really played it or whatever, that this seemed like more of a random pandemic. How do you feel now after being quite enthusiastic about the game, about roll? Is this too random? Is it, how do you?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, this gets back a little bit to the cumbersome fiddliness of the setup. I feel like when we play a game, like, especially when we play the deductive games, a big question for me is, do we trust the designer to have a reason behind what they're doing? Or is this like a shoddily done, not edited? So like, because this game works...
like a detective-style story game. Right.
So this game does so many things well. It's so clean and so elegant that I'm inclined to give the designer a little benefit of the doubt that there's logic. Like there are these weird logics where if something's supposed to come out and it's filled, you follow these arrows, and the setup is so convoluted. But I'm inclined to say, well, you know, maybe that's done to very carefully balance the spread of difficulty and stuff. So it is cumbersome. It is a pain. This flipping of the things over.
I'm saying like, but that wasn't. You're not. My question was that do you feel when we're placing the fire out that that's too random where we put the fire? Because that was a discussion that
Yeah,
we had.
it's true. It misses that pandemic element of you having some control and knowledge of the probabilities in the deck. But for me, it feels reasonable now. I feel like we can look at the board and say, well, there's a dangerous area. We are risking that happening.
Yeah, because like if you have like, say, this person here, and then you have smoke here, you think, well, that could very easily turn into fire. So you want to try to get over there and get them. Or if this is like hazmat over here and there's some fire here, well, you know that's a risk that you're going to have. That like if you leave that too long, and you also know if you go over there, it could explode. But I feel like, and this gets back to like Greg's rule or whatever, which is like if the game is short enough and I can deal with more randomness. And this game is like, I mean, for an hour-long game or whatever, like, I mean, we drag every game out into oblivion, but I mean, it's enough time where I'm okay with that bit of randomness, and I think it's okay.
This is our perfect example of what we like, right? We've got the player turns that you can plan and do it, and then one little randomness at the end of each turn. And the POIs are a tiny bit of randomness, but they're really actually fantastically strategic about
there's
when to get rid of, and you get rid of them, a new one comes out, so you're making this decision like, yes, we should get them off the table.
A fifth of them, I believe, is what it is. A third of them, excuse me, are going to be nothing. And so it will lead to interesting situations where you're like, well, you're not just going to go and save that person. You're like, well, what happens? Like, we need 2 more people. There's a lot of fire. If we spend a lot of time going over there and looking at that, and it's not a person, you know, and it gives it a reason for picking the imaging technician.
So one real point of randomness, which feels completely reasonable.
Yeah, and I would say there's, for the deck gun operator, his special power, because you roll these, the board is in quadrants, and when you're in the fire truck, you'll be able to shoot into this area with the hose. And like, it's kind of cool because it does actually make it so that what it says is you can keep one number and re-roll the other one. I mean, it's kind of it allows you some measure of control in that way. So I do like that it has that in that space.
I love, you reminded me of something. There's an element in these games that I tend to hate, not in this game, but in these kinds of games, or in the Pandemic clones, the whole series of people that try to inspire by Pandemic. And often, like Defenders of the Realm was one we mentioned, they're like, let's take Pandemic and let's add some more dice rolling after every player action to see if they succeed. I love the fact that when you do your turn, you do your turn. You say, I'm going to put up this fire, I'm going to pick up this person, I'm going to do this. Only the deckhand, which occasionally, or only when you roll the thing, there's one little element of dice.
Yeah, but there's a control of that.
Yeah, and everything else is just completely deterministic when the player takes their action. They're like, this is what I'm going to do, I can do it. I love that. I love it makes the game go quickly, it makes you able to plan things. I just very enjoy it.
Yeah, I actually think there's a lot of strategy because the deck, for instance, like, you know, if there was fire, if you were shooting here, like, and there was fire, right, and it and the deckhand shot here, you would know you could eliminate these 2 fire. And then you might think like, well, I'm gonna try to, like, you know, I'm gonna keep this number, the 6, and I'm gonna re-roll this, hoping to get a different spot of the line. Or do you say, well, I'm getting rid of 2 fire, so I leave it. So it does, or you can say, I'm just gonna re-roll both of them. So it does allow you quite a bit of of choice involved in that.
Yeah, it's all calculated risks within a very narrow.
What do they call that when you
mitigating luck?
Mitigating luck. Thank you. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not like we're going off on some tangents here, but when we play Arkham LCG, which we both like a lot, but you know, there's a thing where you're like planning out this whole movie, you spend all this stuff, and you reach in and you're like, oh, fail, nothing happens. You just wasted all your resources, all your time. This game. That doesn't happen. There's none of that. There's no I wasted my whole turn. Now, here's another thing about this game. We did a review recently of Dead Men Tell No Tales, and one of the things that I talked about that I don't like in games is when you feel like you're claustrophobic, like you're straitjacketed in your game. What I love about this game, and it's true in Pandemic too, your characters are, you know, you're in control. You can move quite freely. You very rarely feel like you're not doing anything or that you're locked in or you lose all your actions. Like, there isn't something that says like, oh, you're in fire, you do nothing, you have to wait.
There is one thing. There was one time we were playing this when I was the the reason I talked before about the veteran and the CAFS firefighter, that I put them together is because I remember I was him one time and I kept getting explosions next to me.
That's true.
Because I was near the fire and I kept having to go back and it was just really frustrating and I didn't want to play him again. That's why I played with a veteran to kind of protect him. But I will say that you sort of reap what you sow. If you let the fire get out of control, then you are penned in. Like you can't get to where you need to go. But then it's because you waited one action over the other.
And it is fun. Like it has that pandemic feel where you're like, look at this area. There's 2 people there. They've got smoke. They've got the gas can. Should we push our luck? And when it happens and they get hit, you're like, well, we brought that on ourselves. Yeah. We left them alone there. We were hoping that smoke would be okay. So it's got those real tense moments where you want to push your luck sometimes, and sometimes it works for you and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. Let's see, what else is next?
Do expansions, or you want to talk about our ratings? And
I want to do our ratings before we talk about that stuff. What would you rate this, Greg?
Well, in summation, I mean, I think it's a fairly short game. That during your play of it, it has a lot of interesting choices. I think it has a lot of variability in the difficulty. It's highly thematic, and that's unexpectedly really wowed me. The art is passable, but I feel like it offers a lot of replay in terms of which characters you pick and how you interact with them and stuff, and going at it in different ways, which is a really good sign. And then the fact that the expansions exist makes me want to like really go and do all the maps in all the areas, and just the ideas of like, not to go too far with that, but just like you're like, oh, this skyscrapers or different things, and you're like, whoa, that's really cool. And so it gives me quite a bit of excitement to be the idea of to be able to play through a number of these. So I feel very happy with this. It really fires on a lot of great cylinders. I'm gonna say, I don't know, 8.5 or 9. I think. I feel very strongly about it. Yeah, I feel, and maybe part of that is surprise.
Well, coming into it, certainly I had no expectations, which always helps. In fairness, when you have low expectations coming into something,
that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Can I just mention one thing? It's like, it's weird though, because like, I tend to like more complicated games, deeper games. Like I love Uwe Rosenberg games. I love like Le Havre and or Labora that are like really rules heavy. And you're really making these. But this, I almost feels like a cop out for me to give it such a high rating because I feel like it's so simple. But I just think it just works really well. It's just plain fun. It's kind of like a popcorn game for me, right? Like it's like if you were to like go to a movie and you're like, well, that wasn't very deep. It was just fun to watch somebody go around and samurai sword and zombies or something, and you're like, well, that was fun to watch. It wasn't like Macbeth or something, but it was there's a cubby for that or whatever, a bucket for it.
Yeah. Well, for me, this is a 10.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, this is a 10 for me.
Oh, I kept my streak going. I said, whatever. Wow, really? Like, I never believed
I mean, I think you hit on some of the great points. But for me, like, I wouldn't describe this just as a popcorn game. Maybe if you took out some of those meta decisions about what characters to bring in. Sure. But when you combine the replayability of having a completely different game if you took in different characters with this fact that there's this psychological versus gaminess going on where you're like, I want to do this, combined with the memorable events, like I can remember events in this game, combined with the pacing, and then the icing on the cake is what you said. The idea that it's such a system for expanding it and the expansions that exist. When you add all that together, you get a 10. Yeah. And great teamwork. I mean, that's the other reason we play these games. And the fact that like you're doing this job and I'm doing this job is so satisfying. It's very satisfying to feel like I have a role. I have a role. My role is to get in there and save people. Or my role is to run the deck of the... I mean, that it's so satisfying.
The best example of that for sure is the fire chief. And I think it makes complete sense that like one character is sort of like radioing to the others and getting them like to getting more out of their actions and stuff. But he really makes the game feel like cohesive, like team, which makes sense. I mean, you need to have a kind of a leader on your team.
Yeah.
So yeah, you want to do some
so let's talk about other games. But before we talk about other similar games, I do want us to spend just a couple more moments talking about the expansions and how like we both want to play the different layouts and the different boards. But I just wanted to show everyone
Yeah.
So here's the little dog creature.
Oh, yeah,
I'll put
yeah.
him here. Here's the big box
doesn't wanna play with that
expansion,
doggy?
Extreme Danger.
Do you want to put anything
Sure.
else?
So here's the big box, Extreme Danger, and then there's a whole bunch of small boxes, which are mainly just maps. But I just wanted to show a couple
that are separate. I mean, this is a big
Right,
box image, but there are
So
separate.
look at this one, right? Look, this is like terrorists breaking into an airplane, right? Look at that. And like
the fuel, this is like a whole thing with the fuel
There's
on there.
a
It
couple
adds
extra rules, right?
different rules.
But you really got to figure out a different way to navigate around this. And look at this empty whole area here. So here, there's that one, and of course, there's another side to that here. This is in the airport.
Which is
Totally
so
different
cool.
feel,
Yeah.
looks like. And then I'll just show you.
Very unique looking.
You can open that
yeah, while
one
he's
more.
while he's talking about that, I want to say like some of the extra components are like special people that like
Oh, that's
maybe
right.
there's some overweight
Yeah,
people
that-
or elderly or
more
I don't know,
effort to-
yeah, it's like they're heavier where it's harder to bring them out, or I think maybe there's a child or something. And we didn't even mention the paramedic who can treat a person and they'll just walk with you.
Yeah.
That's a character in the base game, which is really cool. Which
This is the
submarine,
submarine, I think, so you're
which is cool.
underwater.
And you know, there's engines that if they blow up, they'll be done, and then there's like locked doors that can get jammed, or they can hold fire back. So they're sort
That's
of
right. The doors
helping-
are a fascinating
I'm
part.
interested to try that.
And no fire truck underwater.
Yeah. I'm not
So-
quite sure how that one works.
so
We
like-
didn't really read up on that.
Yeah. So I want to play all these. I
Yeah,
really
so that's
am
a
looking
little taste,
forward to it.
but this fact that there's like a second story one where you're like, oh, you have to take a
different
ladder up
sideboard, yeah.
is a great thing, very interesting. And then
Oh,
the
we
fact
played
there's
that. That was quite.
No, we played the
Well, office
skyscraper,
building. Oh,
which
skyscraper.
had elevators to come in and out of, and
That's
there
right.
was a ladder
There was
that
some
we had to use.
strategic elevator decision.
And we played one of the like a duplex or something where it was really hard to. It was like
Certain areas very
you
hard to
couldn't
get
go out
to.
because there was apartments on either side, and
That's
we had
right.
to only. Yeah, and it provided much more
Totally
of a
different
challenge,
decisions to
completely
make.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then and there's one with like a garage where like it has more cars and things that can explode. I mean the list goes on and on and on. So I mean there really is like. You know, when you find a really good system in a game, like and again, pandemic and stuff. I mean, it's like it's great to and I'm a huge Lord of the Rings LCG player, and I love that system. And then every time a pack comes out, it's like, let me try this new scenario, let me try the next scenario, and it's like it's great to say I don't have to relearn this game, but now I can play it a little differently.
Some of the expansions for this are a little harder to get. I would love to see this remade, like kickstarted with a deluxe
whole deluxe
version,
thing.
with a
Well,
deluxe
not now, I
setup,
already
with the
bought
whole setup.
thing, so.
Oh, I'm just for other people.
Sure.
Yeah. So what about? Let's wrap up with. You got any similar games that
Yeah,
you'd
so
recommend
for
to
both
people?
of us, I'm going to quickly say, obviously, Pandemic is a very similar. We've mentioned it in a number of things.
If you're watching
because
this channel, you should own Pandemic and
sure.
love Pandemic.
Yeah, so I mean, just in general, just from when it came out and some of the similarities in game weight and stuff like that, I think for sure. But I think I've not played this game, and I know that you haven't either. But I'm really kind of keen to do so because it's from the same company. I don't think the same designer. We didn't mention in the beginning of the review. I think that this designer I don't think has anything else.
Kevin
which
Lansing.
is very surprising in a way, but it's from Indie Boards and Cards as well, I believe, and it's the same kind of theme, which is police officers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
because of my unexpected,
Is it same company? I didn't know that.
I believe so.
Okay.
I feel very confident.
It does have that same look.
But I feel like unexpectedly really enjoying this because of the theme, or a large part of that was the theme.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of curious to try the police precinct, although I don't think it's as well received. But
it's not. But Vassal loved it, and yeah, you.
I think it might be out of print now, though. Too.
I think so. But yes, you have made me think. Wow, maybe that might be worth
co-op
trying.
challenge, we will be playing.
What's the co-op challenge?
Oh well, we'll talk about that later. That's not
okay.
even.
Yeah, I was trying to think. There is another fire game that's got a cooperative variant called Ablaze, which is a remake of Furio.
It's not strictly co-op, but it has a.
No, I believe it's not strictly co-op.
That
I don't know if
seems
it's
insane.
the main variant or not.
Like,
but yeah,
how would you
and I
be
know you're
competitive
putting out
firefighters?
firefighter. I think you're putting out fires in the forest. Like a forest fire.
I cannot imagine how you would make a firefighter game and not have it be cooperative.
I don't know. It's like real firefighting. Whoever puts out the most fires
Maybe
wins.
in ancient
Gets
Rome, when you're like, I'll buy that house.
No,
or
you put
can let
out
it
the
burn down.
most fire, you get a promotion. Isn't that how firemen work?
I don't think that's accurate.
Oh, we'll have to check into that.
What it was like, Johnson, how much fire did you put out? 30 kilos. I mean, how do you even measure fire?
You keep track
I
on
use
your.
kilos
You
as a
keep
phone.
track. You've got a little pad while you're putting out fire. You keep track of each.
What do you think? Square foot?
Yeah, like how many trees you extinguished. Isn't that how fire men get
Smith,
promoted?
how many square feet of fire? No, that is absolutely it's like I put out 452 square feet. I'm going to be the captain next year. Like
No, that's not how it works. Well, we'll check into it. We'll report back.
That's not how it works.
Anything else?
I feel we've really covered the whole thing.
We've beaten the horse. We rebeat it.
Just
we wrapped it up.
It's a great game.
Great game. Try it. It's
yeah.
worth the investment in getting over the setup.
And you know what? It's a really inexpensive. Pick it up. Try it. If you
up
like
the base
it,
game, try it. Yeah.
keep going with the expansions.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us.
That's what I say.
You do?
I usually do.
Say it.
Well, now it doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Look up how firefighters get paid, and it's not by the square footage of fire.
Maybe. Character, right? But he's not in this box.
Oh, he might be in here.
Let's see if there's anything else.
Another reason I don't want you to take this because.
Oh, do you want to show? You got some hazmats on the table? Whoop, where are the hazmats?
Over there.
Oh, good. Look, I'm just going to get the dog out and put him with the expansion, so when I show it, I show it.
Okay, good. Put him with the perfect.
Alrighty. And let me just make my one note of the other thing I don't want to forget is like when we get to the bad part, setup, and we get critiques.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of insane, that stuff. Alright, now, the only thing we need to do before we start is undo the joke and give me the box back.
I was going to do co-op for 2, and then I was going to say, for Jesse, you didn't realize I stole the box from him.
Okay.